All right, it's coming. It's coming. It's coming. Hold on. There you go. Set up stream. Go live and boom. All right. Here you go. Link is in the chat. See you guys there. Mute yourselves here, please. And yeah. Test, test, test. 1, 2. You guys know the deal. Very first thing to do is let me know that you can hear me on YouTube and that you can see me on YouTube. All right, looks like that's the case. Oh, Hannah.
Who's first again?
Hannah snuck up and she fucking kicked you out, bro. It's too bad. It's too bad. That's life, you know. Competition. It's the nature of the world. It's all right. It's all right. You know, a couple of losses here and there don't hurt you. All right. Cool. So, first thing I'm going to go over is something slightly boring, but very, very important, which is the Pro Tools folder hierarchy. When I get competitive, I get competitive. Hannah, I'm the exact same way, actually to a fault. When I get competitive, sometimes it gets unnecessarily competitive, so I understand. Hey Josh, we're on YouTube. Link is in the chat. See you there.
All right, brother.
All right, here we go. So, whenever you open up Pro Tools, the first thing that you see is this dashboard, which tells you about creating your own session, right? A new session. Or you can actually open up a recent session, or if you have any cloud-based projects, they'll be present here, but we don't really touch on that right now. Sorry. So, first thing you do is give it a name. You guys already know the basics of this, but I'm showing you this to talk more about the structure of Pro Tools folders and how they're saved, how sessions are saved, right? So I'm going to call this session, let's just call this test mix, right? And I usually like to give a PT at the end. This is where you set up your parameters for sample rate, bit depth, etc., etc. I'm going to stay 44.1 because I don't want to lose this stream. I want whatever y'all giving out for clocking it. Yeah, you know what, Alan, you've been consistently first. We should do something for him. I don't know, maybe cookies? I don't know what it is. Anyway, the next thing you want to do as soon as you set up your parameters is you want to find a location that you want to save the session in. Now look, whenever I create a Pro Tools session, right, I have this section over here, this bottom section over here, always set to prompt for location. That means as soon as I hit the create button, it's going to say, hey, where do you want to save this session? Right, it's very important. Now, if you don't want to do that, there's an option right underneath that, which is you can choose the location before you hit create, right? You can choose after you hit create or before you hit create. If you're doing it before you hit create, then you click on location and make sure you choose a proper location that you will always be able to find. That's very important. By default, it might be set to like users, documents, desktop, downloads. Be very, very wary of this stuff and make sure you know where this shit is, because if you can't find it, it's going to be a huge issue, not only just organizationally, but you're not going to look professional. And if the artist needs something like 5 months from now or 2 years from now, it's going to be a pain in the ass to go find. So always, always, always remember where you saved your Pro Tools session. All right. So I'm going to hit create and choose a session. I always save it in a folder called Pro Tools Sessions, so I know that these are where all my sessions live. I hit save, and it opens up your standard Pro Tools session. Now, when I go into Finder, right, or before I even do that, let's just import some audio and get it in here, right? So, let's see. What is this? Oh, these are stems. All right, we'll just go with this. So you already know how to import. Always copy unless you know exactly what's going on. Set it that. Okay, there you go. So we got some audio. All right. So there you go. We got our Pro Tools session. Now, if I want to find this session, here's how I go about it, right? Now, I already know where I saved it, but just in case you don't remember where you saved something, you can always just go to File, Save As, and it'll give you the option to save as within the Pro Tools session folder, right? And then if you click on this little pull-down menu, you'll actually see the tier structure. So it's on my Mac Mini, on my work drive, SAE folder, 2108 folder, Pro Tools sessions there. So I can always find it by following this path, right? So for now, I'm just going to hit cancel. So if I go to my Finder at the bottom, which is a smiley face at the bottom, and I follow that path of work drive, SAE, 2108, Pro Tools sessions, it's right there, Test Mix PT. It's the exact same name as your Pro Tools session. Now look, it's a folder. You can tell it's a blue folder. This is the Pro Tools session folder, which contains everything about the session. Very, very important, right? Because when you double click it, it has all kinds of data like the audio files, bounce files, clip groups, session file backups, which is Pro Tools actually saves backups of your session every couple of minutes. And you can alter that in the preferences, which I'll show you in a second. Hey, what's up, Evan? We're on YouTube. Link is in the chat. So, finally, you got your video files and the wave cache. We've already talked about all these different components, right? Now, the session backup files is really cool because in case Pro Tools crashes, you can always go back to a session file backup. And you can change the preferences for that. If you go into YouTube, if you go into Pro Tools and you go into preferences, I believe there is a backup every, right here. This will say, how often do you want to have session file backups, right? So you can say keep 10 of the most recent session backups and backup every 5 minutes. So it's a cool little preference to have. Anyway, back to the folder hierarchy. So this is where everything about the Pro Tools session lives, right? The .ptx session file is what is the skeleton of the actual session. However, it doesn't contain anything to do with anything related to audio files. It doesn't contain any bounce files or session backups or clip groups or any data like that, which is why this has to be paired with all of the other things, all of the other folders in this session folder, which is why you need to know where exactly this thing lives. Everything about the session is here. So this folder is very important. So whenever you send a Pro Tools session, you have to send this entire folder. Now, ideally what you want to do is right-click and compress, right? That will actually make a zip file of the session, and that is what you want to send to your mix engineer or your client or whatever it is, right? Very, 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 very important stuff. All right. So with that being said, let's get into some of these topics. All right, folder hierarchy, strip silence, and let's see. All right, I'm going to use our favorite session. I know you guys are tired of hearing it, but this is the job of an engineer, to listen to shit 10,000 times and be okay with it, because you're not listening for fun. You're listening objectively and to do work, right? So here we go. Strip silence. So the strip silence feature is a way in which you can quickly edit any piece of audio, any clip of audio, right? So for example, you have this vocal right here, and the vocals have these little spaces in between them, right? And if you increase the size of the waveform, which you can do by going up to the top left over here and clicking the up arrow, it's a vertical zoom in. It doesn't change the volume at all, just the visuals, right? So you can see that there's a bunch of gaps in between all these vocals. Now, one thing you could do is go in and manually, right, change them all. We've already talked about how to perform edits like this, right? You can do that if you want to and keep going till the end of time, or sorry, till the end of the clip. And that's perfectly valid. But another way you could do it, if you were looking for a faster way to do it, is to select the clip that you want to edit, go to edit on top, and there's a little thing called strip silence right here. The shortcut is Command U. All right. Now you see, as soon as this thing popped up, you see a couple of gray lines show up. This is where Pro Tools will actually edit the clip. Now, how does it actually work? So you guys remember how compressors work, right? There's something called a threshold, and once the threshold is crossed, then compression happens, right? So it's very similar in this regard, which is there's a threshold, but it's kind of in reverse, because once the threshold is crossed by going softer, right, crossed in the other direction, you have a signal that's loud, a threshold that's here, and then once the signal gets softer and softer and softer and crosses that threshold, then it will strip any audio after that threshold, right? So for example, also in the reverse, once it crosses the signal, once it gets louder. So for example, let's just take this example right here. So there's silence here, so it's below the threshold, but as soon as you start to get a little bit of a waveform, specifically minus 48 dB, a threshold is crossed, and so a gray line is generated, right? The gray line kicks in only when the threshold is crossed. So if I change this threshold right here, it will change the number of gray lines that show up. Now, I think I had it right before. That was a good place to be. So I'm going to leave it at that. Now, the problem is that if you just click on strip right now, it's pretty good because it'll get rid of all the places in between, right? In between the gray lines. However, you'll see that it actually cuts things off pretty harsh, right?
Black leather sticking to your skin, red lips.
Especially that skin, right? You heard how it cuts it off pretty dramatically, or even here.
Love it temporarily.
That's not bad.
Well, I can't give you words.
So it's pretty good. So I've just done a good job, I guess.
And my mind.
So that might be a little too tight, right? That's literally dead on. So what you want to do is you want to not only create the threshold, but you want to give a little bit of a buffer leading into and leading out of a signal. You don't want it to immediately pop in or immediately cut off. So you have this little section here called clip start pad and clip end pad. So check this out. When I click on the clip start pad slider and move it to the right, these lines over here, the start pads, will move to the left, right? So it's giving you a little bit of a buffer before the actual threshold is crossed. And then same way the other side, clip end, right? So there you go. So you've created something of a buffer before and after the signal. Now you can actually hit strip, right? Then you can press Command F to create fades and give it whatever length you want. Maybe if you want like 100 here, maybe 50 here, and maybe 100 here. Hit OK, and you see you got fades there now. So there, you've literally performed an edit super, super fast, right? Now, that being said, even if you do something like this, I still highly recommend going in and making sure that all your edits are as clean as possible, right? Because even though it's pretty well automated, you know, it's nothing like literally human testing, like going in one by one and doing it. There's nothing like it. This is just like a good way to start. Now, if you want to speed up your process of going through every single clip, right now what I'm doing is I'm looking, making sure it's good. I'm scrolling. The scrolling itself may take a little bit of time and energy. Now, if you want to save on that, there's another option, which is hitting the tab key, right? So if you don't have the tab to transient button checked, which is this one right here, right? If it's not checked, you can actually hit tab to go to every single edit point. So I can literally just keep hitting tab and keep going through all the different starts and stops, right? You can see that my cursor is moving. And if you don't believe me, see how it's moving? I'm just hitting tab and going through all of them. This is the fast way where you can go through all your edits. And still, look, that one, that's not a good one. We can move this over here, keep it moving. So you get the idea. That is the strip silence feature. Very, very, very useful, right? Hey man, link is in the chat. So there you go. Strip silence. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. All right. So I'm just going to undo all this just by boom. All right. Let's see what's next on the agenda.
Don't bundle. I'm in the way in a million chocolate chip. And that's just how that cool.
Yo, we're on YouTube. All right. Link is in the chat.
Copy.
So here we go. Let's get into Beat Detective. That was the next topic. So for Beat Detective, I'm going to go to a drum session. Sharp Hand Joe. All right, let's go with, I want to say this one. Save? No. All right, so let's go to our standard Sharp Hand Joe. This is a drum session with a drummer that is not that proficient. I'm going to change the click track to a default. So listen to the drums. Man, this is loud. So really, really bad. A lot of delayed hits, right? And you can go in and see that there's a lot of time mishaps, right? So if you are confused or you can't really hear it, the easiest way to tell is by going to your grid mode right up here, right? Going to whatever division is the rhythmic pattern. So in this case, it's eighth notes. And just check and see, how does the waveforms line up to the grid? You can see that a lot of them are missing the hits, especially when it gets closer to here. There's like some pretty gnarly time differences, right? So the toms as well, this one's super late. So the idea is you want to be able to edit drums pretty fast, right? In order to do that, the way drums actually work, and you'll learn more about this in Mod 3 when you do drum miking. It's kind of complicated only because you have microphones on the actual shells, so like the kick drum, the snare drum, the tom, the other tom. Then you have these things called overhead microphones that kind of capture the overall bird's eye view of the kit and the cymbals, right? Then you have room microphones, and sometimes you'll have another room microphone way far in the back. So you get different kind of characteristics of the sound. Whenever you're tracking, that's what you're basically trying to do. You're trying to analyze what is it about the source sound that you're trying to capture? Then you deconstruct it in your head and try to place microphones to capture all the components of that sound. So for example, a snare drum, when you think about a snare drum and how it sounds, there's a very punchy attack about it, but then there's also like this kind of bombastic loudness to it, right? So the way you actually record a snare drum properly is you have a close mic on the top, because that actually captures the body of the actual snare. You have another close mic on the bottom because that's where the wires of the snare are, and that's where the crack of the snare comes from. But then you also have a room microphone or overhead of some kind, because a snare does not sound the same without the context of the room that it's in. This is really apparent when you record violins, because they can be super harsh. Especially wind instruments like trombone and trumpets and stuff. If you just put a direct mic on those, they have no life to them. They sound super dry and harsh and really unpleasant. All those instruments, a lot of those instruments require the ambience and context of the room that they're in. Like the sound needs to be able to propagate and grow. That's where their tone and character comes from. And as the engineer, what you're trying to do is you're trying to capture the initial direct sound, but also capture the sound in the context of the room. And combining those two will give you a much better representation of the instrument. So that's all to say that when you see drum tracks recorded, you'll usually see separated drums like kick, snare, hi-hat, toms, but then you'll also see these things called OH. OH stands for overhead. OH mono is obviously one microphone overhead. OH stereo is two microphone overhead. And then a room stereo is probably 6 to 8 feet, maybe 12 feet back. Just to capture the sound of the drums in the context of a room, right? So you have all these components, but the question is, if you want to edit drums and get them tight, you have to map something to the grid. And the question is, what do you map to the grid? Do you map the room tone? Do you map the overheads? Do you map the kick drum, right? Because you can't put all of them on the grid. That doesn't make sense. Why? Because when you hit a snare, the direct microphone collects the snare at a very, very instantaneous point in time. But the microphone that's all the way in the back collecting the room sound is going to collect a reflection and delayed version of the snare, right? So they're not supposed to be in time. They're supposed to have distance in time between them. So you can't just put everything on the grid. You can't just go one by one and put every single track on the grid. It would sound terrible, right? And it would even sound what we call out of phase, right? What you do is you choose which components of the drums you want to put on the grid, and then have every other component of the drums shift relative to that. So for example, if I wanted the kick drum to be the tightness decider, or the thing that I want to be on the grid, if I want all kick drums on the grid, then what I would do is I would analyze this time difference, right? Because this is where the grid is, and this is where the kick drum starts. I would analyze this time difference, and then I would move the kick drum to the grid, but then I would move all the other instruments or all the other tracks by the exact same amount to the grid, right? That way, the kick drum is on the grid and everything else moved relative to that, right? And why would I want the kick drum and snare to be on the grid? Because they're the most important instruments, not only in drums, but usually in the context of any popular song or any popular genre like pop, urban, rock, heavy metal. Kick and snare, always the most important things, right? So that's why I'm saying you choose what you want to grid, and then you move everything else relative to that. Now, in this particular case, the hi-hats are so god-awfully off, right? Because I'm pretty sure, and this is what it sounds like to me, and if anybody knows differently, then please correct me. But this sounds like these drums were programmed. I don't think this was actually performed by an actual person. I think these are programmed drums, and then just the MIDI notes were shifted around or randomized or something. Now, the problem is a real drummer would not play like this. If anybody does play drums over here, you'll know that when you're playing drums, there's a lot of coordination that has to go on. And usually one of the things that all drummers are very aware of, I mean, at a very fundamental level, is that when you play when you're playing a basic beat, right? When you're playing a basic beat, you're supposed to be hitting the snare and the hi-hat at the same time, or as close as possible. This motion in drummers is like, it's like supposed to be second nature, right? So when I see like a snare over here that's early from the grid and a hi-hat that's late, it just raises suspicion that this is probably a programmed thing, right? And also it sounds a little artificial too, right? But this could pass if you processed it correctly. So that's why I'm actually going to use kick, snare, and hi-hat as my grid points, right? As my things to lock in. So you first choose the instruments that you want to lock to the grid, and then everything else is going to be relative to that. So the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to group the kick, snare, and hi-hat into a group. Now I already have them in a group called kick, snare, hats. Putting them in a group means that I can edit them simultaneously at the same time. And because Beat Detective is a type of editing tool, I'm going to group them together. And then I'm going to group the remaining tracks together too. So I'm going to call this, I'm going to press Command G after selecting the remaining tracks and call it Rest of Drums. So I have one group, which is the components that I want to keep on the grid, and then I have another group which is all the other ones that I want to shift relative to the first one. All right? Then, hopefully you're with me. I know this is a little confusing, but it's very, very useful. Next thing you do is you do not select the entire track. This is a very incorrect way of doing things. If you do that, you're bound to run into not only errors, but cumulative errors, which just means they keep adding on top of each other, right? So the best thing to do is go section by section, 4 bars at a time or 8 bars at a time. Let's do 4 bars let's do 8 bars. Let's just risk it, right? So actually, I'm going to do 4 bars because that'll be way easier to understand. So in order to select 4 bars, I first have to find where do the drums start. All right, so the drums start right here, and they're supposed to start on this grid line. This grid line is, if I click on it, bar 2, beat 1, right? You can see it's right there as well. Bar 2, beat 1 is where it starts. 4 bars from that is bar 6, beat 1, right? 2 plus 4, 6. So I need to select from this to this. All right, so I have to select from here all the way to bar 6. Another way you can tell that you're on the right track is you have the counter here, but you also have this useful little subsection called start, end, and length. Start is basically where your cursor is at. End is wherever your selection ends. So if I just select 1 bar, it says from bar 2, 1 to bar 3, 1. And the length is the distance between them, which is 1 bar. So if I just keep an eye on this number right here, the length, I want it to say 400 or 4 bars exactly. So I select 2, 3, 4. Oh, see, I overshot it. So I dial it back. There. 4 bars selected. Next thing you do is pull up Beat Detective, and the shortcut is Command 8 on the numeric pad, but if you want to find it, it's under Event and Beat Detective. All right. Now the ones that we're going to use from Beat Detective are the last 3 over here: the clip selection, clip conform, and edit smoothing. So the first thing I'm going to do is under clip selection, I want to make sure that the selection area is correct, right? I selected bar 2 to bar 6, and it looks like it's the same, but I always be sure by clicking the capture selection button, because sometimes this will be wrong. It'll say like bar 6 beat 3 to bar. That's wrong. It's going to analyze the wrong thing. So I want to make sure when you capture selection, it's capturing the right start and end point. Next thing, I want to let Beat Detective know that this selection contains eighth notes, which is the smallest division, right? The hi-hats are on eighth notes. But even some of the kick drums come on eighth notes as well. Again, this is more music theory. We've already talked about this. Definitely recommend taking some type of, introductory course to music theory. You can find them online, even free YouTube videos on basics of rhythm, basics of chords, basics of scales. That will take you very, very, very far, right? Much further than trying to figure it out every single time. Trust me. All right. Now we have our selection. We've told Pro Tools it's in 4/4 and that it contains quarter notes. Then I will go to my analysis section, click on Analyze, and increase the sensitivity. This is detecting all the transients within the selection. It's like a transient detector. Oh, and yes, thank you so much, Hannah. You have a classmate, a Grammy-winning classmate, mind you, who is willing to help you with music theory. I mean, what more do you fucking want, right? Anyway, thank you, Hannah. Very, very cool. So there you go. I increased the sensitivity because I actually want to detect all the hi-hats. If I wasn't selecting the hi-hats, right, if I didn't care about the hi-hats, I would just do the kick and snares. But I do want all the hi-hats just because they're so horrible in this. So anyway, all the pink lines are detections of the transients. But before I actually cut at these points, before I make splits at these points and then shift the audio around, shift the transients around, I also want to make sure all the other tracks move relative to this. And so to do that, because these are all grouped below, I can just press Shift and the colon button, and all the purple lines move down, but they're still locked into the transients of the first three. They're not looking at these transients. Like if you look down here, they don't really care about any of these transients, right? They're only going by the transients up here. You can tell right there. So this is perfect. Now, if you click on Separate over here, it will cut at those points. Then you go to Clip Conform, and this is where you can tell Pro Tools, hey, all those transient lines, wherever you've seen them, shift them to the grid while moving the clips as well. Now you can add swing and all if you want, but I'm not going to do that. Hit Conform, and look what's going to happen. All these transient lines, right? This and this and this, they're all going to, well, not this one because this is the transient over here, but they're going to move to the grid once I click on Conform down here. So 1, 2, 3, boom. See how they're all on the grid now? But then we have one more problem, which is because you shifted all the different transients, there's a gap in between a lot of these clips. And it solves that too by going to Edit Smoothing and saying fill in the gaps and crossfade. So let's do a crossfade of like 50. And then once I hit crossfade, here's what happens. Once I hit smooth over here. 1, 2, 3, boom. Creates crossfades for me. And then you got some drums. Right? Way, way tighter than it was before. And just to confirm, let's see what the original was. Yeah, right? You can already tell. That's how bad it is. So I'll do the next one as well. So I'll show you what it's like if you do it a little faster, right? So you find the start point, and again, just because it's a cool editing program doesn't mean you shouldn't go in and manually clean up. So you see right there's like an additional kick drum. You don't want that shit. You want to make sure it's as clean as possible. So anyway, let's do like a normal speed one or slightly faster. So you select the region that you want to edit, but you only select the tracks that you want to grid. Now, I want to grid kick, snare, hi-hat, but I see some toms here too, and I would like to have them gridded as well. So for that, I have to take off the group of the rest of drums, select the toms as well. Now I open up Beat Detective, go to Clip Separation, Capture Selection, so that we're from bar 6 to bar 10. Click on Analyze, increase the sensitivity, hit the Shift and colon button to select the remaining tracks that you want to move relative to the things that you're gridding. Separate, clip conform, edit smoothing, boom. That's how fast you can do it, right? I think those crossfades are too big, so... right? Way tighter. And again, even though it's super useful, you want to go in and make sure there aren't any wonky sounds. I'm definitely hearing some weird hi-hat stuff in there, so definitely go in and check all that stuff. But that's how you do it. And obviously you'd have to do this for the entirety of the track, but you can only go section by section, or else you have a chance of messing it up. All right? So that's Beat Detective. Or the review of Beat Detective. Okay, so let's do... All right, let's open up subgrouping. Let's talk about buses and stuff now. Dream State. I think this is the session that I started the other day. I hope it's 44.1. Actually, let's go in and actually check, because that would suck. Yep, 44.1. Yeah, the thing is, if I change my sample rate, the streaming totally locks out. Not sure why, but that's what I've discovered. I don't remember this track, but maybe you guys will. I think it was like some interesting ambient track, if I'm not mistaken. I remember this. This is a cool song. So let's just focus on vocals real quick, right? I'm just gonna save as, let's see. Save as mix, let's call it buses and auxes. All right, so just for the purposes of right now, gonna get rid of all these, gonna get rid of all, maybe I'll just start from scratch, right? Boom. Boom. All right, so we got a bunch of vocals here. Here we go. Got a bunch of vocals, and we've got some EQs, compressors, de-essers. They're all leveled out, and they have some background vocals, which are grouped as well, right? You can see the groups A, B, C, and D, which allows me to move multiple faders at the same time and other things. So first thing to understand about subgrouping or busing or whatever you want to call it is that the term buses and auxes get confused a lot of the times. And to be quite honest, Pro Tools doesn't really make it a lot easier to understand them either, because the terminology gets so interchangeable that it becomes really confusing, right? So for whatever purposes I'm going to describe right now, just understand that this is in the context of Pro Tools, the program. It's similar in consoles, but some of the terminology kind of switches here and there. So just kind of be wary of that. So if I have a bunch of vocals right here, the first thing that I would want to do is create reverbs and delays, reverb and delay sends for these vocals, right? So I do that by using the concept of buses. Now, when I go into any track, whether it's the input or the output of the track, you have the option of output, a physical output, like my headphones, or you have the option of buses, right? Now, these buses are just randomly numbered buses, and they are virtual and only present within the Pro Tools program, all right? They're literally just like virtual pathways, like virtual patch cables to send signal from one place to another. That's it. You can even think of them as like patch cables in a way. Yeah, so it's not that they have different definitions for them, but the utility of buses and auxes slightly vary from consoles to DAWs. I'm not sure why they did that, but that's kind of how it is. And even that is not entirely accurate, because so in a console, right, you actually have buses that sends audio signals from place to place, right? They actually act like these bridges that I'm talking about. But then you have these things called auxes on consoles. And the auxes are usually what you use to send reverbs and delays and stuff. And you send a copy of the signal on what's called a local aux, which connects to a master aux, right? This is how all consoles work, or most consoles work, right? In Pro Tools, some of the terms that they use for that are different, which is why it gets a little confusing. So if I wanted to set up a reverb aux, right, or a reverb send, or whatever you want to call it, the terms are interchangeable, but basically what you want to do is create a reverb track that you can send all copies of vocals to, right? You do that by creating a auxiliary input track, right? This is Pro Tools' way of kind of combining the idea of a stereo return and a subgroup. I'm not sure why they call it an aux input, but that's how they did it. So aux sends copies and buses send signals from one place to another. In the context of a console, yes, right? But buses can also be used in this term of like having all similar instruments grouped under one common fader. So subgrouping, the way we've learnt it, is equivalent to busing on consoles, right? Or buses, creating buses on consoles. Gets kind of confusing, I know, but that's why a lot of people get stuck on this stuff. But just understand that don't worry too much, or don't get too bogged down by what the technical differences are, but understand how to use them more, and it'll make a lot more sense. So, in order to create a stereo return for your reverb, you create a stereo aux input, right? And I'm going to call this one vocal reverb, right? So you have an aux track right here. By default, they're like this dark green. You always command click the solo button of auxes, because you always want signal to be passing through them. Even on consoles, when you have master auxes, they're usually by default always turned up, like in any studio you go to. Always the case. So you command click the solo button. You set your input to a virtual bus, all right? So in this case, let's just choose a random bus number, bus 29 and 30. All right. And then you actually put your reverb plugin on the aux. All right, let's just use this one for now. I don't know if I have any cool preset. I guess not. Now, in order to send copies of the vocal to this reverb unit, I have to go to the sends over here, right, of every track, click on a slot, and send a copy to bus, whatever, 2930, whatever I chose. I chose 2930 over here, so it has to be 2930 on the send. That pops up a little fader. This fader determines how much of the lead vocals is going to, how much of the copy of the lead vocals is going to the reverb unit. So if I want an exact copy of the main vocals to go to the reverb unit, I would set this to 0 dB on the fader, right? But that's usually not what you do. You dial it in so that you have a dry version of the vocal along with a wet version of the vocal. So watch what happens. Let's find some vocals. And of course, we have to set these up.
It hides, it blurs reality.
How much of the copy of the lead vocal? I know, it's so many words, right? How much depends on the context of the song. I think we established that this is a very ambient track, right? So
It hides,
this is too little,
it blurs reality.
right? If you listen, the reverb is kind of there as like a tail end to the vocals. Listen carefully.
It hides, it blurs reality.
It's almost like a tail end of the vocal, right? Kind of like a sustain for the vocals. But in this context, I mean, that would be good for like some regular electronic tracks or whatever. Usually a lot of electronic tracks are either doing some version of that or really dry or really reverberated. This is an electronic track, which means more of an ambient vibe. So you turn it up.
It hides, it blurs reality.
Right? So the more the more of the copy of the vocal that you send, the more reverberated it sounds. Now, if you don't want to always have to pull up this fader, you can press Command and click on the arrow, and that'll pull up a little smaller fader here. Much, much easier to control.
It hides, it blurs reality.
Now remember that by default, these sends are post fader, which means if I turn the fader of the dry vocals down, it reduces the signal in the send as well. But if I set it to pre-fader and I do the same by turning the dry down, that's not the case. This fader now no longer affects the signal to the send. So this is a great way of putting something way in the back of a song. So let me show you an example, right? This is regular reverb right here.
It hides, it blurs reality.
And you see how we have some harmonies over here, like these background harmonies?
Awake inside.
Right? If you wanted to put these background vocals 1 and 2, if you wanted to put them like way in the back of a mix, like more subtle and not present, what you would do is, same idea, you would put reverb tracks on them, but then you would set them to pre-fader so that they're more reverberated and dial back the actual dry signal.
Inside, it hides, it blurs reality.
You know what I mean? Obviously, if you choose a different reverb, you can get different textures and different positions and stuff. But that's how you do the whole back of the mix kind of effect. All right. So that's how you send for reverbs. So in Pro Tools, buses are used to send signals from one place to another. You can send a copy of a signal by using the sends on every track, and you use auxes or aux inputs for your actual returns, your stereo returns, for your reverb, for your delay. But auxes are also used for your subgroups, or can be used for your subgroups, right? So for example, you have all these vocals and now you want to put all of them within an aux subgroup. So the way you do that is you create another stereo aux, call it vocal sub or vocal bus, whatever you want to call it, right? I usually color my subgroups blue. And then you want to output all these vocals to this subgroup, not send, because sending is just for sending copies. Now I want to send the entire signal, not just a copy, to this vocal sub. So I go to the outputs and set them to whatever input my subgroup is. So if I go to the vocal sub, set the input to, say, bus 55, 56, then I go to the outputs of the individual tracks and set them to bus 55, 56. Now, obviously, you guys already know the shortcut for this. Select all of them, Shift Option, select the output, bus 55, 56, boom. Now all of these are going to bus 55, 56, which means I can not only control my entire vocal group with one fader, all right? Let's choose this.
It blows reality.
Right? Right? Not only that, but I can actually process the entire vocals together. And a very common thing to do with vocals is, especially if you have group vocals, you want to not only have them evened out within the individual tracks, but once all the group comes in together, you don't want it to be such a spike in the sound, right? So you want to compress the entire group as a whole too, so that not only does your individual vocals even out, but then your whole group evens out as well. This serves a dual purpose, which is when you compress group vocals, they tend to blend and mesh together a lot nicer. So let's take this portion right here, and let me just do a quick let me add some reverb on these too.
That's keeping me awake inside.
I didn't do the pre-fader on them.
That's keeping me awake.
For this context, I'm not going to use pre-fader because I want you to hear the meshing of the vocals.
That's keeping me awake inside. It hides. It blurs reality. Voices in my head are slowly fading, softly whispering.
All right, so you might have already heard it because there's already a compressor on it, but let me go a little bit more extreme so you can hear it.
Voices in my head are slowly fading, softly whispering.
All right, so let me take the compressor off. See if you can even hear the difference.
Voices in my head are slowly fading, softly whispering.
Versus.
Voices in my head are slowly fading, softly whispering.
You really want to listen to how when the group vocals come in, it gets a lot more kind of melded together. Again, this is a very extreme case. You would usually not compress this hard on group vocals, but hopefully you can hear that. I'll play it one more time. So without.
Voices in my head are slowly fading, softly whispering.
So it sounds good. They're nice and tight, but they kind of have like a distinction to them with the compressor.
Voices in my head are slowly fading, softly whispering.
It's that group thing at the end that really kills it, right? That really brings it home, right? It's so subtle. I mean, it's actually a little bit more extreme that I like, but the effect is subtle and it's very, very useful whenever you're doing group vocals, like a choir-esque kind of vocal, and you want to like kind of mesh them all together and have them like a little bit more cushiony and tight. Not tight, cushiony. That's a better word, like cushiony and melded together. Very, very common technique. So that is busing and subgrouping. I know this is like kind of the more confusing thing to do, but hopefully you got it. It's very important that you get this concept because you can't really do anything else. You can't really mix, to be honest, without it. All right. So let's talk about, let's see if I can find another track. Oh boy. I can't remember if this is I never remember if sessions are 48 or 44. I should probably like, I guess it's not that bad. I may or may not have shown you this one before. But we're going to go with it. Because I think there's a hook in here. Let's see.
We can make it if we only tried. You say it's your right, but I'll give you closure on the sweet summer night when hell freezes over. I'll wait till say nobody's day. The night when pigs fly, when you come back to me.
I guess I could do that one, but I'm just going to see if I have another session, just real quick. No, not so fine, boy. I'll just rewatch a bunch. Well, hopefully, yeah, I know it's, yeah, this is, so did you put the compression plugin on the vocal aux or both? So that's the idea, right? So when you have group vocals or group anything, right? Things have to work on their own, evened out. Things have to work in the context of a group, evened out. And then things have to work in the context of an entire mix. So it's kind of like this top-down approach that you're taking. So on that other session, I had compression on... no, don't say that. So you could see that I had compression on the individual tracks, right? Just to even them out. But then once you have evened out all the individual tracks, right? When all of them come in together, there's a little spike in the volume there too. That's not on an individual level. That's on a group level when all of them come in together. So there's not only compression on the individual tracks, but there's compression on the group as well. I'm being sassy to the singer. I'll just rewatch a bunch. This is I'm being sassy to the singer. Don't mind me. Why are you being sassy to the singer? You don't like her? She's dope. She's fucking badass. All right, so I'm trying to find a song with an actual hook, and I would prefer not to use the stretched out like a rubber band one again, because if you guys are sick of it, you can't even imagine how sick of it I am. Alone with You. I don't know what this is, but actually before I do that, always check the sample rate. 44.1. I wonder if this is already somebody's final.
And tell me, what is it like? Showers fall down on me. Tell me.
Extra credit to remix the Rubber Band song. Hell no, dude. I don't want to hear that thing again. Oh, man. Merc? Oh, that's the song. Fucking Ty. We are all stretched out like rubber bands by that song. Yeah, I agree, Hannah. It's like, I think we're all a little bit sick of that song. What's basic mixing? Knockout? Oh, I did a mix for that? No, it can't be. Pretty Girls. Okay. Oh, I haven't heard this one in a bit. But the big question is 44.1. All right, cool. Sure. So, let's open up this song. I couldn't find a hip hop one, sorry, but the concept will still kind of play out, right?
In the trenches, gotta get mine. Our body tension has got me high. Lick my fingers, pout the lips. Tongues will linger, sweat so thick. In this jungle, walk a thin line.
Okay. So that's a hook. I mean, it's a pre-chorus, right?
In this jungle, walk a thin line.
This is the pre-chorus.
Silver skin feels so nice. Shimmer, baby, watch me dance. Pretty girls like to prance, and I'm all caught up.
Chorus.
Figure you out. This game has got me crazy. All those words fall from your mouth like a moan. Ow! And I'm all caught up, got so many doubts. And then you call me baby. Back and forth, my double-edged sword.
That's funny. It sounds like Kesha. I never got into Kesha, so I have no idea. All right. So before we get into the hook flying thing, let's just review one more thing, which is committing and freezing tracks, right? Very, very important. So if you have a track, let's take Sonia's vocals right here, right? And without any of the effects, just going to solo her vocals, without any effects, we've got this.
In the trenches, gotta get mine.
Right? So you add your effects.
Has got me high. Lick my fingers, pout the lips. Tongues will.
All right. So if you want to save on processing power, so suppose this was like a massive session and you're like, oh my God, I need to save on processing power somehow. And you're like, you know what? These vocals, I'm fucking happy with. I'm solid on these vocals. I could actually perform two separate types of functions. One is called freeze and one is called commit, right? So the freeze function, if you go to any track, right, and you see this little snowflake over here, it's right above the Elastic Audio Samples blue clock that you guys know about, but it's right here, this little snowflake. You can find it there, or you can just right click on the track and just say freeze, right? But when you click on this little snowflake, what happens is it renders the entire audio through the plugins and effects that you have on the track, the inserts, right? And then it freezes that within the track, right? So these are all frozen, which means that the plugins on the inserts are not performing in real time, right? Because they're real-time inserts or they're real-time Audio Suite plugins. They're not performing any function in real time right now. However, the clip has already been pre-rendered, so it does sound still the same.
In this jungle, walk a thin line.
Right? Sounds exactly the same. The problem is I can't actually edit this. I'm trying to delete and I can't. I can't go in and fade, right? I can't do anything because this is a pre-rendered frozen clip, right? So if I wanted to go in and edit, I would have to go back to the snowflake, click on it to unfreeze, make the edit, and then refreeze. All right?
Tongues will linger.
Right? Remember, what it's doing is it's pre-rendering this entire clip through all your inserts so that your inserts don't have to work in real time. It's pretty awesome. Right? Now, here's the thing, is that you can save on processing power, and if you need to edit, you can always just unfreeze, edit, and so on and so forth. The other cool thing is that you don't have to freeze all the inserts, right? Right now, I think I only have these inserts. I can actually choose up to which point to freeze inserts. So for example, I'm like, you know what? I want to keep the compressor accessible because I might want to change my compressor settings in between. So I'm going to freeze the first two plugins, or the first three plugins rather. So I right click on the plugin and I say freeze up to this insert, right? Now it's going to do another pre-render, but it's only going to pre-render through the first three, right?
Pout the lips.
But the compressor is not frozen.
Tongues will linger.
I can still
So thick.
fuck with it.
In this jungle, walk a thin line.
Right? So this is the benefit of freezing. You can partially freeze, fully freeze, and you can also save on processing power. A more extreme version of freeze is called commit, right? So if you right click on a track and instead of freeze, if you do commit, right, it'll say, which track do you want to commit? You say the one that I've selected. What do you want to retain? You say you want to keep all your sends to reverbs and delays and stuff like that. And what do you want to do with this actual track? You say either hide and make it inactive or delete it or whatever, right? I'm just going to hide and make it inactive. Or just for the sake of it, I'll just make it inactive. Hit OK. It renders the audio through your inserts, creates a new track, a new clip, right? Deactivates the previous one, the original one, and the new one doesn't have, you see how this has no inserts, doesn't have any of these inserts, but it still kept the sends and returns for the copies of to the reverb and delay, and it sounds exactly the same.
Like two pants and I'm all caught up, can't figure.
And if you don't believe me, just watch. Ba-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da, right?
Goes like two pants and I'm all caught up, can't figure you out. This game has got me crazy.
It's exactly
All
the same,
those words fall-
right? This is just a rendered version through all the plugins, but you've kept your sends and returns. Now you can also do a commit, just like a freeze, up to a certain point. So you're like, you know what? I love these vocals, but I'm sure I'm going to need to change the compressor every now and then because I'm not fully confident and committed to that. So I'll right-click the de-esser and commit up to this insert. So it'll commit the first three plugins. Same deal. Renders it through, makes a new track, new clip, right? But the compressor is still here, so I can still mess with it. And again, sounds exactly the same.
Ow! And I'm all caught up, got so many doubts, and then you call me baby.
And there you go. That is freezing and committing. All right. So let's go back to this track. So here we've got a song by a band called Siren, which is made up of three people. They only did one EP. It was back in the studio days that I produced, recorded, mixed, and mastered. I should say co-produced, but yeah, they only did one EP. I think the concept was really cool. I wish they had kept going, but in this context, we have a basic pop song, right? You've got your verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, verse, or not even bridge, like pre-verse, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, outro, right? Now, if you're really super organized about everything, right? I don't even think this is the original session. I think this is like a teaching thing I did. So this isn't the original session or the original mix. But if you're organized about everything, what you would do is you would put up these things called markers on the very top of your session. So you see how like you've got your bars and beats up top, you've got your timeline, you've got all these different rulers, you got your tempo, right? Everything that you need to see. You also have this little thing called markers that you can add across the timeline. So if you put your cursor somewhere like here, and you go to your markers and press the plus sign and say, hey, it creates a marker at that point called hey, right? You can click on it and move it around. You can also hold Option, hover over it, and then delete it by clicking it. These are super useful to lay out your entire track. If you want to keep organized about this stuff, you know, everything from color coding to subgrouping to markers plays an essential role. So let's just do this real quick, right? So another way you can do it is by pressing the Enter key on your numeric keypad, which is this one right here. So if I hit play and I enter, pops up a marker, right? So what you usually do is you play through the song, and then as you go through the song, you just put markers. Now I'm not going to do the whole thing, but I just want to give you an idea, right?
In the trenches, gotta get mine. Our body tension has got me high. Lick my fingers, pout the lips. Tongues will linger, sweat so thick. In this jungle, walking in line. Silver skin feels so nice.
So the other part of it is that you're not going to be perfect while doing this, because even when I hit enter, I might be off here or there, right? So you want to go in. You want to go in and actually make sure that you're dead on the grids for all these, right? If you have the tempo right. Right? You put these on the grid.
Like a cobra, I slither softly, a stifle whispers. You've been naughty, I threw you down.
Anyway, you get the idea, right? And the pre-chorus again.
In this jungle, walking in line.
Anyway, you go through. So putting these markers isn't something you typically do during a mix, right? Because like this is already usually done during the tracking phase. If you've never done a tracking session before, a very common thing to do is once you prep the track that you're going to record over, before the artist comes in or while the artist is doing like a practice take of the whole thing, you want to set up your markers, right? And have everything laid out. Now I'm just going to do it really quick right now. And I'm all cut, right? Chorus 2. Main riff. Bridge. All right, make sure these are on. Blah, 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 blah. Chorus 3. Anyway, so you get the idea. I really love this band because they had such like a natural, organic, almost like they were like playing at a cafe or something. It's so raw and real. I don't know. I loved it. Wish they would do another one. I know all these people personally, so it's pretty cool. Anyway, so what you would do is, as your artist is going through the track or before the artist gets there, as a part of the prep process, you'd set up all your markers. And now you might be wondering, well, why do you want to set up all these markers for a recording session? Well, one, it shows that you know what the fuck you're doing. Two, you can tab through all of these pretty quickly by just clicking on the marker point. So if you're recording and you need to go back and record, you can just hit wherever the point is. So for example, if you're all the way over here, let's just put this on Sonia's voice for a minute. So suppose you're playing in verse 2, right? And the artist is like, hey, go back to pre-chorus 1. I'm like, okay, click, boom, I'm already there, right? Recording. Go to chorus 2, all right, boom, right there, fast. And if you want to do it without the mouse movement, you can actually go to Window, go to your memory locations, which is Command 5, and bring up all the different markers, right? And the fast way to go in between all of these, you can either click on it, but again, if you don't want to use the mouse, is on the numeric pad on this section, right? You can tab through all the numbers. You see that every memory location has a number assigned to it. If you press dot, the number, and then dot again on the numeric pad, you can go to whichever location you want, right? So you're in pre-chorus mode, right? And you're like, hey dude, send me back to verse 1. You go, okay, done. I'm not even pressing play, right? Go to pre-chorus 2. It's location 8. It's over there. Go to chorus 3. It's 12. So you can go through these sessions super quickly. This is where you get really good as a tracking engineer. And again, highly recommend you get good at this shit. Right? So anyway, that's a couple of purposes for markers, right? Now, another real cool purpose of markers, again, assuming that you've actually gone in and put it on the grid correctly, is for flying hooks, right? So for example, let's take an example of the pre-chorus. It's pretty much the same, just two separate performances in this case, right?
In this jungle, walk a thin line. Silver skin feels so nice. Shimmer,
So I'm not going to do the oohs, just the main vocals.
Pretty girls like to prance
So pretty girls like to prance.
and a mock.
And then, and I'm all cut up. That's all chorus stuff, right? So suppose we haven't even gotten to that yet, right? We haven't even recorded that yet. And the guy's like, hey, fly the pre-chorus over to the next one, right? You've already marked that the second pre-chorus is here, right? Now look, this is the way I do it. This is the fastest way that I know how to do it. People have other ways of doing it. Whatever's comfortable for you, right? So the pre-chorus 2 starts right here. I can tell by just clicking on the actual marker, right? As long as I have the cursor on the track, I can click on the marker and the cursor moves to that location, but stays on the track, right? So I do that. I hold shift. I click on pre-chorus 1. So it'll stay on the same track, but go exactly to pre-chorus 1, right? And then you just perform a Command D.
In this jungle, walk a thin
And it's an
line.
exact copy.
Silver skin feels so nice.
Right? Just a Command D. It's exactly there. And this applies for everything. So suppose you don't have a second chorus, right? So let's just delete all this shit. I think Shailene is all. Oh, so yeah, let's just get rid of the chorus, right? So the chorus is what? Like, boom, all that. this chorus has a slight variation, but doesn't matter in this context. So you want to copy the chorus over, but the chorus has multiple vocals and stuff. Doesn't matter, right? You choose your tracks by just basically highlighting what you want, right? So, for example, I would go to chorus 2. I would hold, believe it's not. I think it's shift then. Shift, and then click on the tracks that I want to, right? So I got that. Oh, that's it. Just 3 tracks. This one and this one. At chorus 2, hold shift again. Boom, command.
All caught up, can't figure you out. This game has got me crazy. All caught up, can't figure you out. This game has got me crazy.
It's an exact copy. Exactly, like 100% exactly the same. All right, so that's how you do it. And again, it applies for anything. So for example, if you wanted to do pre-chorus and chorus, you can do it for as many tracks as you want, right? So let's say pre-chorus is here, right? Pre-chorus is right here. Which tracks do I want to copy? I want to copy the main vocals, these 2 vocals, and that's it. So click on the track that you want, put the cursor there, hold shift and click on the tracks that you want as well. Click on pre-chorus 2, hold shift, click on pre-chorus 1,
In this jungle,
and it's exactly the same.
walk thin line. Silver skin feels so nice. Shimmer, baby, walk in this jungle.
They're exactly the same. So that's how you do it. That's the way I learned how to do it in the studio, and like that's the fast way that I know how to do it. Maybe there are other ways you can get creative, but it's really about just using the grid to your advantage and the markers to your advantage. Look, there's another way to do this as well, right? So suppose you're in chorus 1, you have main vocals over here,
And I'm all caught up, can't
right? You can select the chorus, press Command C to copy, go all the way to chorus 2, press Command V,
all caught up, can't figure you out.
and it's exactly the
This
same.
game
See, everything is based on knowing that grid. That's why I stress so hard in the beginning about understanding the grid and knowing how to navigate between it, because this is how you get really fast and efficient at Pro Tools. Okay, we cooking now. Thanks, I'm gonna use that from now on super fast. Good. Glad you guys found that useful. All right, so that being said, let's take it back to Zoom. I believe I covered all my topics.